Welcome all to the today's class. We begin with development of the cardiovascular system. We begin with our quote, Master MRCOG with concept-oriented clarity. Concentrate on this particular topic. It is going to be very important from the examination point of view. Okay. So what are the general principles? The cardiovascular system is the first functional system to develop. The first system to develop is the cardiovascular system. It begins in the third week of embryonic life. It is necessary due to the rapid growth and diffusion limits. It is derived mainly from the mesoderm. So the splanchnic mesoderm, it is the splanchnic mesoderm which is responsible for the development of the cardiovascular system. The origin of the cardiovascular system develops from the cardiogenic mesoderm. Where it is located? It is located cranial to the buccopharyngeal membrane and laterally it shifts ventrally and caudally due to the embryonic folding. We know that this embryo is getting folded in both directions. Anteroposterior also and laterally also there is a folding. So that is why this buccopharyngeal membrane, so this cardiogenic area or the cardiogenic mesoderm, which is located cranial to the buccopharyngeal membrane, that will shift ventrally and caudally due to the embryonic folding. Then there is a vasculogenesis. There is a de novo formation of the blood vessel which occurs in the yolk sac. Developing into the yolk sac, intraembryonic mesoderm, and the alarm. The peripheral cells will lead to the formation of the endothelium and the central cells will form the primitive blood cells. So at three places this blood vessel formation happens. One is in the yolk sac, second is intraembryonic mesoderm, and third is the allantois. Initially the blood islands will get formed. So from these blood islands, the peripheral cells will develop into the endothelium and the central cells will form the primitive blood cells. Then there is angiogenesis, formation of the new vessels from the pre-existing vessels. This is responsible for expansion and remodeling of the vascular network and it is regulated by VEGF and FGF. These are the factors which are responsible for the development of the angiogenesis. So this is what is the primitive heart which develops in form of two tubes. These two tubes will get fused together in the center. Okay, so it has got two ends. This is the outflow tract and this is the inflow tract or the venous end and the arterial end. Okay, and these five parts you should know. From if you go from venous end, you will have the sinus venosus, primitive atrium, primitive ventricle, then this bulbus cordis and the truncus arteriosus. So these are the five parts which you should know. And this if at all you want to remember, just remember we know that the heart has got atrium and the ventricle. Okay, atrial end and the ventricular end and this primitive atria. So these two are the important components. This sinus venosus is towards the atrial end and this truncus arteriosus is at other end. Okay, so ventricle will have this truncus arteriosus and the bulbus cordis is in between the two. So sinus venosus, primitive atrium, primitive ventricle, then there is a bulbus cordis and then there is a truncus arteriosus. Okay, so this ventricle with outflow tract will be coming from these truncus arteriosus, bulbus cordis and the primitive ventricle. Well, atria with inflow tract will come from the primitive atrium and this sinus venosus. Okay, so that is what is the things which you should know. This truncus arteriosus will form the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. Okay, so your ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk will come from the truncus arteriosus. This bulbus cordis will lead to the formation of the trabeculated portion of the right ventricle and smooth outflow tract. Okay, this is the bulbus cordis. It will form the trabeculated portion of the right ventricle and smooth outflow tract, while the primitive ventricle will lead to the trabecular portion of the left ventricle. Primitive atrium will lead to the anterior portions of the right and left atria, and sinus venosus will form the posterior portion of the right atrium and the coronary sinus. Okay, so these are the things which you should know. So how does these tubes get formed? Where these tubes are formed? We have seen that there is a cardiogenic area into this mesoderm. This cardiogenic area lies anterior to the buccopharyngeal membrane and there is a development of the initially heart tube. There are two endocardial heart tubes which are formed initially. Embryonic lateral folding will lead to the fusion of into a single primitive heart tube. Okay, so the tubes which we have seen in the previous picture, after fusion they will have a single tube. Okay, now what are the layers of the heart tube? It will have endocardium, that is the inner, then there is a cardiac jelly, and then there is a myocardium, that is the outer layer. Okay. Now, what are the parts or the segments of the primitive heart tube from caudal to cranial? So, if you go from caudal to cranial, you will have the sinus venosus, primitive atrium, primitive ventricle, then there is a bulbus cordis and the truncus arteriosus. This will give rise to the mainly the ventricle and the outflow portion, and this is the inflow portion along with the atria. Okay, so this you have to know this particular part. Then next is a cardiac loop. It's called as D-looping. Okay, so D-loop gets formed by around week 4, where there is an elongation of the heart tube and it bends to the right. It establishes normal spatial relationship. Abnormal looping will lead to the congenital heart defect. Okay. So cardiac looping or the folding converts the straight tube into three-dimensional structure. It occurs around day 23 to day 28, that is in the 4th week of embryonic life. So 3rd week the development has started. By around 4th week the cardiac looping, that is the is formed. Okay. Then next is a formation of the primitive heart tube. What we have seen, we'll see the recap once again. So it is derived from the splanchnic visceral mesoderm. So this you remember completely. From where it is coming? It is coming from the splanchnic mesoderm, and it lies anterior to the buccopharyngeal membrane. There are two endocardial heart tubes. Initially, they will fuse and will form the single primitive heart tube. The heart tube suspended in pericardial cavity by dorsal mesocardium. Later on, it will disappear. So what is cardiac looping? Process by which the straight heart tube bends, twists, and folds. It is also called as de-looping, which is normal. Okay, it establishes the right left orientation of the chambers. What is the direction and mechanism of looping? The bulbus cordis and the primitive ventricle move ventrally, caudally, and to the right. So the bulbus cordis and the primitive ventricle will move ventrally, caudally, and to the right. This bulbus cordis and the primitive ventricle. Okay, so this bulbus cordis and the primitive ventricle, they will move ventrally, caudally, and to the right, while the primitive atrium and the sinus venosus, that is the atrial end, and the inflow tract will move dorsally, cranially, and to the left. Okay, that will lead to the formation of the S loop. Okay, so result of the normal D looping, the primitive ventricle will become the left ventricle, the bulbus cordis will become the right ventricle, the atria come and lie to the posterior and superior to the ventricle, and it establishes the normal atrioventricular ligament alignment. Okay, so there is a establishment of the normal atrioventricular alignment. This is because of the D-looping. So what is the effect of D-looping? There is a primitive ventricle will form the left ventricle, the bulbus cordis will form the right ventricle, then atria will come to lie posterior and superior to the ventricles, and it will establish the normal atrioventricular alignment. Okay, so this is the same thing which is shown here. So there is initially the folding of the heart tube. Okay, so there is a de-looping by week 4, and further then there is a septation. Okay, this we will see in the subsequent slides. Okay, so here if you see, this is the ventricle and this is the outflow tract and this is the atrium, and now what is getting formed is these are the endocardial cushions. Okay, so this is by around early week 5. So cells from the dorsal and ventral walls of the heart will grow and form the two protrusions called as endocardial cushions. These grow towards each other and fuse and to form the left and right atrioventricular canals. Okay, so these two endocardial cushions will lead to the formation of the left and right atrioventricular canals. So there is a cells from the dorsal and ventral walls of the heart will grow and form the protrusions called as endocardial cushions. Okay, now next what happens? Within the primordial atrium, a septum called the septum primum. Now concentrate on the atria. Okay, within the primordial atrium, a septum, the septum primum grows towards the endocardial cushion. Now there is a formation of the septum and which grows towards these endocardial cushions. And this septum is known as the space between the cushions and the septum is known as foramina primum. As the foramina primum decreases in size, a second opening forms in the septum. This is called as foramina septum. Okay, so you have ostium primum here. Okay, this is the septum primum which is getting formed, and it starts growing towards the endocardial cushion. Okay, and you have got a foramina primum. So as it grows towards the endocardial cushion, there is another foramina which develops here, that is the foramina secunda. Okay, then a second septum develops on the right side of the septum primum. So initially this was the septum, that was the septum primum that was going down towards the endocardial cushion, and there was a foramina primum. By the time the foramina primum gets closed, there is another foramina which appears, that is the foramina secundum, because of the absorption of the tissue in the septum primum. Okay, now another septum develops from here, that is the septum secundum. Okay, which is on the right side of the septum primum. Okay, a primordial muscular ridge exists in the floor of the right ventricle. Now what is happening in the ventricle? A primordial muscular ridge exists in the floor of the ventricle. As the left and right ventricles grow, their medial or the midline walls fuse to form the interventricular septum. Okay, so there are changes which are happening in the ventricles also a primordial muscular ridge is developing between the left and right ventricle, that will grow, and it will fuse to form the interventricular septum. So within the bulbus cordis and the truncus arteriosus, now we will see the truncus arteriosus and the bulbus cordis. So within the bulbus cordis and the truncus arteriosus, which forms the outflow tract, small ridges will develop. They are continuous throughout the outflow tract, and they will form the spiral shape. So in this, there will be small ridges will develop in a spiral manner, and they are continuous throughout the outflow tract, and they will give this spiral shape. Okay, so as these ridges fuse, they create a spiral shaped septum throughout the outflow tract. The original outflow tract is therefore separated into both aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so you get two partitions, this aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so future pulmonary trunk and the future aorta. Okay, because of this development of the spiral outflow tract. Okay, for spiral ridges, they will form and create a spiral shaped septum throughout the outflow tract. That will lead to the development of the two, that is the pulmonary trunk and the future aorta. Okay, that is how the structures. Now let us see once again. We will recapitulate especially this atrial part, because the questions are asked on this topic. So we will concentrate here. So septation of the heart generally happens between week 4 to 8. So what we have seen, the atrial septum, there is a septum primum. This septum primum will grow towards the endocardial cushion. It will have foramina primum. This foramina primum will get closed, but by the time it closes, there is another foramina appears in the same septum, that is called as foramina secundum, that gets formed. Okay, then another septum develops called as septum secundum develops. Then the gap between the two will form the foramina ovale, that is remains functional in the life. So this gap between the septum secundum and this further opening as a foramina secundum will join these two, that is called as foramina ovale. Okay, this ventricular septation, muscular interventricular septum grows upward. The membranous septum closes IV foramina, and failure will lead to the ventricular septal defect. That is the most common congenital heart disease. So what is the most common congenital heart disease? That is the VSD. That is the commonest one. Okay, the outflow tract separation, the truncus arteriosus is divided by aorticopulmonary septum. It forms the ascending aorta and the pulmonary trunk. This is also we have discussed, and this is neural crest dependent. This is the most important thing you should remember. This is the neural crest dependent. Last lecture we have seen where exactly the neural crest is and what does this neural crest gives rise to. Okay, so this truncus arteriosus is divided by the aorticopulmonary septum, and it will form the ascending aorta and the pulmonary trunk, and this is neural crest dependent. This is the development of the major arches. Okay, there are aortic arches. They are 6 in number. They develop sequentially. Okay, so what are the important derivatives? The third arch, fourth arch, and the sixth arch. The third arch will form the common carotid artery. The fourth arch will form on the left side, it will form the aortic arch. On the right side, it will form the subclavian artery. And the sixth arch will form the pulmonary artery and the ductus arteriosus. This is also asked the fate of these arches. Okay, you should know the fate of all six arches. Okay, I have posted video in the Telegram group. I hope you people are listening to those videos. So third arch will lead to the formation of the common carotid artery. It will form the subclavian artery, and the sixth arch will form the pulmonary artery along with the this ductus arteriosus. Okay. Now coming to the development of the venous system, there are three paired venous system. One is a vitelline vein, second is umbilical vein, and third is a cardinal veins. Okay, so these three venous system, you should know development of the venous system, how this venous system develops from the three paired venous system, that is vitelline veins, umbilical veins, and the cardinal veins. And then further remodeling of this will lead to the formation of the IVC, SVC, and the portal vein. Okay, so left umbilical vein persists in the fetus. The right one disappears. Okay, what happens in the fetal circulation? The placenta is the organ for the oxygenation, and there are three shunts which are frequently asked. One is ductus venosus, second is a foramina ovale, and third is a ductus arteriosus. One is above the level of the heart, one is at the level of the heart, and one is below the level of the heart. Okay, so at the level of the heart, you have the foramina ovale. Okay, that is right to left shunt in the fetal life. Okay, then you have ductus venosus. Okay, and then you have ductus arteriosus, which is above the level of the heart. This is from the umbilical vein carrying the oxygenated blood and going directly into the IVC, bypassing the liver. That is ductus venosus, and postnatally it gets closed. So they are frequently asking about these particular shunts and what are their remnants in the adult. So there are many SBA, these arches they are asking, and this fate of these shunts they are asking. Okay, so this you should know. So this aortic arches, you should know all six arches, and as far as this development of the major arteries are concerned, third, fourth, and sixth one. Okay. Then let us see important milestones in the development of the cardiovascular system. Earliest heartbeat is by day 22. The neural crest defect will lead to the conotruncal abnormalities that we have just seen when we were discussing about the development of the pulmonary trunk and the aorta or the outflow tract. Okay, so this outflow tract in a spiral septum gets formed. So this is neural crest dependent. So if there is a defect in the neural crest, it will lead to the conotruncal anomalies, and it is generally associated with the one which syndrome, D George's syndrome. Okay, so it is the most sensitive period for teratogenesis is the third to eighth week. So third to eighth week is the teratogenic period. Common congenital heart diseases are the VSD, ASD, TOF, and transposition of the great arteries. Okay, we have also seen about this looping, that is C-shaped looping, D looping, and the S-shaped. So C-shape is the first bending of the heart tube. D looping is the direction, that is the right-sided looping is called as D looping, and S-shape is the final configuration by which the adult-like orientation happens. Okay. Now what happens if the neural crest migration fails? We have seen that the conotruncal development is the neural crest dependent. So what happens if the neural crest migration fails? Failure will lead to the conotruncal heart defects. Okay, so what are these? So common examples, it can lead to the patent truncus arteriosus, persistent truncus arteriosus, because there is no separation of the great vessels. Then it can lead to the tetralogy of Fallot, that is abnormal septum alignment. Then there can be transposition of the great arteries, that is a failure of spiral septum, and double outlet right ventricle, that is the abnormal outflow tract division. So if the neural crest migration is not there, there will be conotruncal heart defect, and it can be persistent truncus arteriosus, then tetralogy of Fallot, then transposition of the great arteries, and the double outlet DORV. Okay, TOF, TGA, and persistent truncus arteriosus. Okay. From exam point of view, you should remember these neural crest defects are classically associated with the D George's syndrome. These features will include conotruncal cardiac defect, then thymic hypoplasia and hypocalcemia. Okay, this D. George's syndrome will have conotruncal cardiac defect, thymic hypoplasia and hypocalcemia. Now let us see the summary. This ventricular septation, it is a muscular septum which grows upwards from the floor of the ventricles. Then membranous septum will close this interventricular foramina. Failure will lead to the ventricular septal defect. Then outflow tract septation, that also we have discussed. Truncus arteriosus is divided by aorticopulmonary septum. The neural crest cells form this particular septum and failure will lead to the conotruncal defect. Okay, so this interatrial septum, so this is what we have seen. These are the endocardial cushions. So the primitive atrium changes. Initially, the embryonic heart has one common atrium. So initially, there is a one common atrium. So the goal of development is to divide this into right atrium and the left atrium while still allowing the fetal blood shunting. So this fetal blood shunting is important in the fetal life. Okay, so that is why this foramina ovale, which is there, that remains. So the septum primum forms first. A thin crescent-shaped membrane grows downwards from the roof of the atrium toward the endocardial cushion. This roof of the atrium to the endocardial cushion, septum primum grows down, but initially it does not close it completely, leaving a gap that is called as foramina primum. So initially it is a foramina primum. This foramina primum, this initial gap between the lower edge of the septum primum and the endocardial cushion is called as the foramina primum. So these different terminologies you should know because they can ask you this in the examination. Okay. Then what is the function? It allows the blood to pass from the right atrium to the left atrium. Eventually, this septum primum fuses with the endocardial cushion. So your foramina primum will get closed. Okay. So the fate of the foramina primum is to get closed. But by the time this foramina gets closed, there are multiple perforations which are happening into this particular septum, leading to the formation of the septum secundum. So before the foramina primum closes completely, there is a apoptosis or the cell death that creates the holes in the upper part of the septum primum, and these holes join together to form the foramina secundum. So this septum primum, initially it grows down and it forms the foramina primum here, but later on there will be complete fusion and there will be here there will be apoptosis of the cells will lead to the formation of the foramina secundum. Okay, so the blood flow continues through this. Okay, then septum secundum forms. This is the septum secundum which is getting formed on the right side of the septum primum. Now a second thicker septum develops, forms to the right side of the septum primum. It grows downward but does not close completely, and this creates a new opening. This is nothing but the foramina ovale. So this septum secundum creates an opening which is called as foramina ovale. The opening in the septum secundum is the foramina ovale. It lies slightly inferior and posterior to the foramina secundum. The septum primum acts as a valve over the foramina ovale. So the septum primum, this septum primum is there. It will act as a valve over the foramina ovale. Okay. So what is happening in the fetus as far as circulation is concerned? So the blood is flowing from the right atrium through the foramina ovale and it pushes the septum primum like a flip valve and goes into the left atrium. Okay, so there is a right to left shunt through this foramina ovale. Okay, so what is the purpose? It allows the oxygenated blood from the placenta. It will bypass the lungs and will reach the left atrium. But what happens at the birth? After the birth, left atrial pressure will increase. The septum primum is pushed against the septum secundum and there is a functional closure of the foramina ovale. The septum primum, because there is an increase in the left atrial pressure, the septum primum is fused against the septum secundum and there is a functional closure of this foramina ovale. We'll see this septum primum, because there is an increase in the pressure in the left atrium, this septum primum will have the flap-like covering, we can say, over the this foramina and it at the time of birth. Okay. So So at birth, there is increase in the left atrial pressure, septum primum pushed against the septum secundum, and there is a functional closure of the foramina oval. Eventually, it forms the fossa ovalis. Okay, so finally, it will form the fossa ovalis. So septum primum, septum secundum, then there is a foramina. So foramina primum, foramina secundum, foramina oval. These three things you should remember. Septum primum forms a gap, that is foramina primum. Upper holes in the septum primum will form the foramina secundum. And then the foramina secundum form, it will form an opening, that is the foramina oval. So these are the things which you should remember. Okay, now let us see the structure, origin and function of these. So septum primum, this is the thin first septum. It is a valve of foramina oval. Okay, then foramina primum, it is a gap between the septum primum and the endocardial cushion. Early interatrial shunt, this is the early interatrial shunt. Then there is a foramina secundum, that is the apoptosis in the septum primum. It will maintain the shunt. Okay, then there is a septum secundum, it is a thick muscular septum. It forms the margin of the foramina oval. Then this foramina oval, which is nothing but the opening in the septum secundum, and it is the main fetal right to left atrial shunt. Okay, from right atria to the left atria. So failure of the fusion will lead to the atrial septal defect. There are three types of atrial septal defect. Okay, this also you should remember. They can ask you the SBA. Ostium primum ASD, ostium secundum ASD, and patent foramina oval. So these are the three types of ASD. This ostium primum ASD is because of the failure of the septum primum fusion. Okay, if the septum primum fusion does not happen with the endocardial cushion, that is the ostium primum ASD. Now, what is the ostium secundum ASD? It is the excessive resorption of the septum primum. If there is excessive resorption of the septum primum, that will lead to the ostium secundum type of ASD. And third is a foramina oval. Okay, that is the failure of the postnatal fusion. So these are the three different types. Which one is the most common? Ostium secundum is the most common. That is because of the excessive resorption of the septum primum. Okay, we have seen how does this ostium secundum develops because of the tiny holes which develops because of the apoptosis. Okay, so initially this was a single chamber heart, and then single chamber atria. Later on, because of the formation of this interatrial septum, it will have the right and left portion. Okay. We were also discussing about the three paired venous systems. So we have already mentioned there are three paired venous systems, that is vital line veins, umbilical veins, and the cardinal veins. So initially the embryo has three bilateral paired venous system that will drain into the primitive heart. All of them drain into the sinus venosus of the primitive heart. Venous systems are the vital line veins, umbilical veins, and the cardinal veins. So vital line veins will drain the yolk sac, and in the adult, what is the fate? It will form the portal venous system. Okay, so vital line vein will in the adults will form the portal venous system. Second is the umbilical vein, which drains the blood from the placenta, and it is a part of fetal circulation. Third is the cardinal veins that drains the body of the embryo, and that will form the systemic veins. So finally, IVC, SVC, that is getting formed mainly from these cardinal veins. The umbilical veins will have the function in the embryo. Okay, and these vital veins are draining from the yolk sac, and in the adult they will form the portal venous system. Now let us see one by one. These vital line veins, these drain the yolk sac. During the development, they form the network around the developing liver. Final derivatives will include the portal vein, the hepatic sinusoids, and the part of the IVC, that is the hepatic ligament, hepatic segment. This is the fate of these vital line veins. So during the development, they will form the network around the developing liver, and final derivatives will include the portal vein, the hepatic sinusoids, and the part of the IVC. Okay, then vital line veins will lead to the formation of the portal circulation. This you should remember. Okay. Then umbilical veins. There are two umbilical veins we know, and initially there are two veins and two artery, but the right umbilical vein later on disappears. So these veins bring oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. Initially, there are two umbilical veins, right and left. During the development, this right umbilical vein will disappear and the left umbilical vein persists. This is also SBA. Which umbilical vein persists? So, left umbilical vein persists and the right umbilical vein disappears. The left umbilical vein carries the oxygenated blood to the fetus. It connects the ductus venosus, allowing the blood to bypass the liver and reach the IVC. So this left umbilical vein will carry the blood from the placenta. It will bypass the liver and through the ductus venosus. This is the one shunt which we have seen. This is the shunt below the level of ductus venosus, will drain the blood, will bypass the blood and will drain to the IVC. After birth, what happens? The left umbilical vein will become the ligamentum teres hepatis. Okay, this is also asked. So all these particular things are the SBA. So left umbilical, right is already disappearing. Okay, left one remains. Okay, this left umbilical vein will form the ligamentum teres hepatis. Okay, then third is a cardinal vein. So we have seen the vitelline veins, we have seen the umbilical veins, and third is the cardinal veins. These cardinal veins will drain the bodies of the embryo. There are three components, and remodeling of these veins will form the major systemic veins such as superior vena cava, part of the IVC, and azygous system. So what are the three components? The anterior cardinal vein, the posterior cardinal vein, and the common cardinal vein. The anterior cardinal vein will drain the head and the upper part of the body. The posterior cardinal will drain the lower part of the body, and the common cardinal will drain into the sinus venosus. So you have the anterior cardinal vein, the posterior cardinal vein, the common cardinal. Anterior will drain the upper part of the body and the head. The lower part is from the posterior cardinal. Okay. So these are the venous system. So final adult venous veins are formed by the remodeling. The SVC, what is the origin? SVC is coming from the right anterior cardinal vein plus right common cardinal vein. Okay. Then IVC is from the vitelline veins plus subcardinal plus supracardinal veins. Portal vein is from the vitelline veins. The ligamentum teres is from the left umbilical vein. In the adults, this left umbilical vein will form the ligamentum teres. Okay. So vitelline vein form the portal system. The cardinal veins will form the systemic veins, and the left umbilical vein persists to carry the oxygenated placental blood in the fetal life. Okay. So these are the, and later on this left umbilical vein will become the ligamentum teres. So these are the things which you should remember from the SBA point of view. Okay. And this we should see this vitelline veins will form the portal venous system. Then umbilical veins will form the left umbilical vein will remain, that will function in the fetal life, and these cardinal veins will form the IVC, SVC, etc. Okay. So that finishes the development of the cardiovascular system. Thank you.